Amazing Couples by Victor Yup and Doris Mock. Chapter 10. Sin's Seductive Snare. 2 Samuel chapter 11. When the 50-year-old former Haiti President Jean-Bertrand Aristide fled in 2004 after 13 years in power, he left 8.5 million Haitians more miserable and disillusioned than ever. Aristide was the nation's first democratically elected president, but he followed in the dictatorship of Duvalier dynasty before him, but it was not always like that. When he was a young priest, Aristide spoke eloquently and passionately to the poor people of Haiti, long considered the America's poorest country, where 50% of the population is illiterate, unemployment reaches 70%, and malnutrition, HIV, and AIDS were epidemic. He inspired them through radio to believe that they could overcome misery and oppression, but he was expelled from his priesthood in 1988 for excessive activism. Power, wealth, and success proved that he was no different from the dictatorships he had condemned. The Duvalier's secret police tortured and killed many of the family's political opponents, but Aristide's gangsters attacked protesting State University of Haiti students, smashed the university's windows and computers, and bludgeoned several professors, including the university rector, whose kneecaps were broken. Human rights groups accused him of pocketing a share of billions in drug money. Former allies and admirers are still unable to identify when or understand why he abandoned the path to greatness. Father Joseph Simon, a former seminary teacher who taught the teenage Aristide at the Salesian Fathers Seminary, said, "It's part of the psychology of people from the lower echelons of society. Once they go up in the world, they forget where they came from." David's fall from grace began when he had nothing better to do with his time. At the time when kings were off to war, David was loafing around. After leading Israel to defeat the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, and the Amalekites, 2 Samuel 8, 1-12, David left the rest of the job to his general and his men, 1 Chronicles 20, verse 1. By 2 Samuel 11, the king and his men's struggles were so different. His men's struggle was whether they could get out alive. David's struggle was whether he should get out of bed. Verse 2. The soldiers wondered how long they could go on fighting. The king wondered how long he could go on sleeping. The men fought against fierce defenders. The king flirted with beautiful women. Why do powerful men like David go downhill when they are in their prime and at their peak? What do people stand to lose when they have nothing to gain? First, losing your self-control leads to distorted perception. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1-5. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. She had purified herself from her uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." Lust has been called wanderlust for its restless heart, untamed passions, and loose morals. Jan LaRue of Concerned Women for America explains, "Lust is the antithesis of true love. Lust is all about me." Frederick Buechner says, "Lust is the ape that gibbers in our loins. Tame him as we will by day, he rages all the wilder in our dreams by night. Just when we think we're safe from him, he raises up his ugly head and smirks, and there's no river in the world flows cold and strong enough to strike him down. Tim Stafford says lust turns quickly to dissatisfaction. It results in fixation. Woody Allen represented this so-called disease of the heart when the then 56-year-old Allen defended his bizarre love for the 35 years younger adopted teenage daughter of his wife, saying, "The heart wants what the heart wants. There's no logic in these things." The news of Bill Clinton, Kobe Bryant, and Tiger Woods' adultery and infidelity is not new to many married couples. Peggy Vaughn, the author of The Monogamy Myth, estimates about 60% of both husbands and wives have had an affair in their current or a previous marriage. But a more accurate 1992 landmark study by Edward Lawman of the University of Chicago found that 25% of men and 10% of women had strayed. Dallas Willard, professor of philosophy at USC, says lust is to use another person for my excitement. Just as Charles Swindoll said, there is no sin in the bait. The sin is in the bite. Joyce Baldwin said that David's glance became a gaze. I would add it became a gamble. David staked and risked all he had on a short fling, a sexual encounter, a one-night stand with a married woman. He went up, looked down, and sought out. From 2 wives in Ziklag, 2 Samuel 2 verse 2, he had tripled to 6 wives altogether in Hebron, 2 Samuel 3, 3-5, and not only more wives, but also more concubines in Jerusalem, 2 Samuel 5:13, but lust always wants more. David had married the prettiest woman in the land and other lands, including the intelligent and beautiful Abigail, 1 Samuel 25 verse 3, who was the most beautiful woman of her day, and Maacah, the daughter of the king of Geshur, 2 Samuel 3 verse 3. Abigail was one of the 10 most beautiful women in their era. Others included Sarah, Genesis 12:14, Rachel, Genesis 29:17, 2 Tamars, 2 Samuel 13 verse 1 and 14 verse 27, Abishag, 1 Kings 1:3, and Esther, Esther 2 verse 7, and Job's 3 daughters, Job 42:15. Bathsheba could not hold a candle to Abigail. In Hebrew, Bathsheba was very good-looking, not the traditional word for beautiful. But in Abigail's case, the word for NIV's beautiful, verse 2, is an interpretation of 2 Hebrew words, good and looking. Bathsheba was attractive, cute, striking, shapely, and stunning, but her beauty was in the eye of the beholder, while Abigail was truly the fairest of her era. If that was not enough, David could summon any sweet young thing from near and far to be his wife or concubine. God gave David everything and more except one, because Bathsheba was married to Uriah. Interestingly, David's disobedience was compared to man's disobedience in the garden when he picked from the one forbidden tree. In fact, the only other time the 2 words for Bathsheba's beauty, good and looking, appear together in the Bible matched the description of the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that God had made that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. Genesis 2:9. Stagnation, boredom, and listlessness were dangerous to David. David should have been somewhere else, somewhere far, somewhere needed. Ironically, the battlefield was not as dangerous as the palace, the roof, or the bed. The Hebrew word remained, verse 1, also translated as lived or stayed, is a loud indictment on David. David was at his humble best when he remained in desert strongholds and in the hills, 1 Samuel 23:14, 25, 29 and 26 verse 3, in the caves, 1 Samuel 24 verse 3 to 4, in foreign territory for a year and 4 months, 1 Samuel 27 verse 7, and even during simpler days in Hebron, 2 Samuel 2 verse 3, or Jerusalem, 2 Samuel 5 verse 9. He was a godly king before he built and lived in the luxurious palace, 2 Samuel 7:1. Someone has said, "Idle hands are the devil's playthings." David had everything to lose when he had nothing to do, nowhere to progress, and nobody around him. He had reached a glass ceiling. He was in the retirement mode, and he had a mid-age crisis. The word "find out" or "inquire," verse 3, was another slap to David's face. The word is used only 3 times in 1 and 2 Samuel and in the life of Saul and David. Its first occurrence marked the rise of Saul when he inquired of God when his father's donkeys were lost, 1 Samuel 9 verse 9. Its next occurrence signaled the downfall of Saul when he inquired about his future from a witch, 1 Samuel 28 verse 7. Its last occurrence compared David's downfall with Saul's. Just as Saul inquired of her, the witch, David inquired of the woman. The parallel could not be any more striking. Bathsheba was David's witch, bewitching and beguiling and bewildering him to his fall. David did not inquire of the Lord, nor inquire of his men what to do. Even when his men hinted to him that she was taken, verse 3, he sent messengers to take her, verse 4. He did not send a note or a messenger, but messengers to take her. David forcibly took Bathsheba, although she was no angel or blameless herself. Second, losing your sanity leads to devious practices. 2 Samuel chapter 11 verses 6 to 13. So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go down to his house. When David was told Uriah did not go home, he asked him, "Haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my master Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open fields. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Then David said to him, "Stay here one more day, and tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. A young Hercules came to a place where 2 roads met. The road on his right was hilly and rough. The road on his left was broad and smooth. While the lad stood in doubt as to these roads, he saw 2 fair women coming toward him, each on a different road. The one who came by the flowery way reached him first, and Hercules saw that she was beautiful as a summer day. Her cheeks were red, her eyes sparkled. She spoke warm, persuasive words. "O noble youth," she said, "be no longer bowed down with labor and sore trials, but come and follow me. I will lead you into pleasant paths, where there are no storms to disturb and no troubles to annoy. You shall live in ease with one unending round of music and mirth, and you shall not want for anything that makes life joyous, sparkling wine, or soft touches, or rich robes, or the loving eyes of beautiful maidens. Come with me, and life shall be to you a daydream of gladness." By this time the other fair woman had drawn near, and she now spoke to the lad. "I have nothing to promise you," said she, "save that which you shall win with your own strength. The road upon which I would lead you is uneven and hard, and climbs many a hill, and descends into a valley and quagmire. The views which you will sometimes get from the hilltops are grand and glorious, but the deep valleys are dark, and the ascent from them is toilsome. Nevertheless, the road leads to the blue mountains of endless fame, which you see far away on the horizon. They cannot be reached without labor. In fact, there is nothing worth having that must not be won by toil. If you would have fruits and flowers, you must plant them and care for them. If you would gain the love of your fellow man, you must love them and suffer for them. If you would enjoy the favor of heaven, you must make yourself worthy of that favor. If you would have eternal fame, you must not scorn the hard road that leads to it." Then Hercules saw that this lady, although she was as beautiful as the other, had a countenance pure and gentle, like the sky on a balmy morning in May. "What is your name?" he asked. "Some call me Labor," she answered, "but others know me as Virtue." Then he turned to the first lady. "And what is your name?" he asked. "Some call me Pleasure," she said, with bewitching smile, "but I choose to be known as the joyous and happy one." Corrupted by power and passion, David was blinded in his eyes, cruel in his heart, and ruthless in his actions to cover his tracks. When he decided to kill Uriah after he had failed to pass the responsibility for baby and fatherhood to his soldier, he killed a man more righteous than him. David's deception and trap are poignantly depicted by the use of the Hebrew "surely," not translated in English. "I will surely send you back," verse 12. "He surely drank with him," verse 13, and "to surely encourage Joab," verse 25. Next, he used three imperatives in verse 8 and 12 to cover his tracks. Go down, wash your feet, stay here. Uriah was a no-nonsense, an award-winning, and a die-hard David loyalist, military man, and fellow comrade. He was a soldier's soldier, a man's man, a friend's best friend, the type you want to fight along, cover you, and die for. Not only did Uriah refuse food, wine, and sex, he did not even go down to his house or wash his feet, verse 7. The trusted warrior refused to accept any comfort, take any advantage, or receive any benefit. His conscience and guilt would not allow him. He could not fatten, warm, entertain, or enjoy himself as long as his brothers were in the fields, in the line of fire, and in the battle of life and death. 3 times the Hebrew text recorded that Uriah did not go down to his house, verses 9, 10, and 13. He would not be a part of David or Bathsheba's house or sin. On their second meeting, Uriah was more blunt, obstinate, and annoying before his king, verse 11. Home was where the ark of God was, where his field commander was, and where his fellow soldiers were. Here was a Hittite, verse 3, a non-Israelite, who loved the Lord, loved the king, and loved the Israelites, the culture, the friendship, and brotherhood. According to 2 Samuel 23, verse 39, Uriah was one of the elite 30 fighting men in Israel. Uriah's passion was for king and country, but David's passion was for woman and sex. Uriah had proven his worth to the king, risked his life in the battlefield, and earned the respect of hardened fighters, but he chose to lie in a crowded room than to lie in his warm bed and lie beside lowly servants, not even macho warriors, than by his wife's warm body. The only promotion Uriah allowed himself was to sleep on a mat, verse 13, instead of sleeping at the entrance door, verse 9. That ought to have brought a tear to David's eye, but he was in too deep and over his head to see. In a touch of irony, the rich man David had wanted the ark of God to join him in the warm indoors, 2 Samuel 7, but the poor man Uriah preferred to join the ark of God outside in the freezing night when winter barely passed. Verse 1. David had lost his mind, head, and marbles. He was cold, calculated, and cunning. The king made sure he asked about how everyone and everything in general was doing, and not Uriah in particular, verse 7, and was careful not to mention the words wife, bed, or sleep, or sex in all his words, verses 8, 10, and 12. On the third day, the sober king brought out strong spirit and comfort food to make Uriah long and lust for his wife. But Uriah had the discipline and strength of a determined combatant. Unlike David, his head, heart, and even body were in the right places. The Hebrew word for sleep that is used 4 times in the chapter points to the contrast between classy, dignified, and sober Uriah and crass, depraved, and shameless David. David slept with another man's wife, verse 4. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants. Verse 9. Turned down sleeping or lying with his wife. Verse 11. In such times, and slept on his mat among his master's servants. Verse 13. Sadly, the drunk Uriah was sober, but the sober David was drunk with lust and murder. Third, losing your scruples leads to due punishment. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 14 to 27. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, "Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, 'Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal-Sheth? Didn't a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the walls so that he died in Thebaz? Why did you get so close to the wall?' If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Also your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" The messenger set out, and when he arrived he told David everything Joab had sent him to say. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance to the city gate. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." David told the messenger, "Say this to Joab, 'Don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it.' Say this to encourage Joab." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife, and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. Bill and Steve are discussing the possibility of love. "I thought I was in love 3 times, Bill says. "Thought?" Steve asks. "What do you mean?" 3 years ago I cared very deeply for a woman who wanted nothing to do with me, Bill says. "Wasn't that love?" Steve asks. "No, that was obsession," Bill explains. "Then 2 years ago I cared very deeply for an attractive woman who didn't understand me." "Wasn't that love?" asks Steve. "No, that was lust," Bill replies. And just last year I met a woman while I was on a cruise. She was gorgeous, intelligent, and a great conversationalist, and had a super sense of humor. Everywhere I followed her on that ship, I would get a very strange sensation in the pit of my stomach. Well, wasn't that love? Asks Steve. No, that was motion sickness, Bill replies. Thomas Fuller, 1608 to 1661, said, Lord, before I commit a sin, it seems to me so shallow that I may wade through it dry-shod from any guiltiness, but when I have committed it, it often seems so deep that I cannot escape without drowning. The heinous things David did include borrowing his general's hand, sacrificing his man's life, and employing the Gentiles' arrows. Commentators agree that he made Uriah carry his own death warrant to Joab. David broke at least 4 commandments: adultery, lying, murder, and coveting another's wife. He ordered Joab to send Uriah to the front line of the hottest fighting zone and to withdraw his troops, leaving Uriah defenseless. Verse 15. Striking down Uriah was not enough. Taking him out was the plan. Verse 17. Uriah did not even have the option to be MIA or to be a POW. David did not want him injured, impaired, or imprisoned. If Uriah would not drink, he will die. The way Uriah, the fierce warrior, died was a further indictment on David. In his madness, David sent other fighting men to their death, verse 17, because of the fierce war that raged that day, and they died without burial. Back at the palace, David put on a monkey show, but did not even cry crocodile tears for one of his most loyal and renowned fighting men. The messengers were reminded to say 2 times, Your servant Uriah, verses 21 and 24. David, who cried till evening, 2 Samuel 1 verse 12, when Saul died at the hands of archers, 1 Samuel 31:3, did not shed a tear, blink an eye, or ask for details about the latest arrow casualty, verse 20. David mourned for Saul, who hated him, but not for Uriah, who loved him. Instead, he said calmly and consolingly, Do not feel bad or evil, literally. The sword has no eyes, pals, or feelings, verse 25. David thought that was the end of that, but that was not the Lord's thinking. Even after Uriah's death, the text still insisted that Bathsheba was his wife, verse 26. People did not say anything when Uriah died, when David and Bathsheba suddenly married, and when parenthood quickly arrived. But the matter did not die, they were not at bliss, and judgment was at hand. The last sentence of this chapter and the first word of the sentence in Hebrew sought justice for Uriah. But evil is the thing David had done in the eyes of the Lord. Conclusion. Oliver Stone observed at the height of the O.J. trial, the line between thinking murder and doing murder is not that major. The line between lust and adultery is also a thin one. Also, it's a thin line from having everything and being somebody to loving nobody and enjoying nothing. Do not satisfy your passions, silence your conscience, or sell your soul. Do you give in to the cravings of sinful men, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of the flesh? Are you jealous and envious of what others have and not thankful and appreciative of what you have? Are you humble, honest, and helpful? Bible Study Questions. Group Study. 1. List the characters. 2. What responsibility did Bathsheba have in the matter? What responsibility did David have? 3. How long was David sleeping? Verse 2. When did David plan to kill Uriah? Verses 12 to 14. 4. Where did Uriah meet danger? Verses 18 to 23. 5. Why did Uriah many times not return to his house? Verses 7 to 13. 6. How did David deal with the matter when he heard of Bathsheba's pregnancy? How did David plan Uriah's death? Compare and contrast: David's attitude toward the army, Uriah's attitude toward the army; David's attitude toward God, Uriah's attitude toward God; David's sin, Bathsheba's sin. Progression: the way David fell into sin, the way David hid his sin, the way David planned murder. Group sharing. 1. In sin, is one partner an offender and another party a victim? Is it an acceptable view, or are both faultless because of differing opinions or false expectations? 2. Is apologizing an easy thing to you? Why? 3. How do you as couples practice empathy? How do you process your spouse's sin or a specific behavior? 4. Share about how important it is to apologize and forgive in marriage. From Doris, the psychologist's desk. In this passage, we observed how David and Bathsheba engaged in an affair and how the cover-up process finally led to a murder. The lesson learned is not to get into that kind of situation. When you are already in the kind of situation at risk of being tempted, flee immediately before anything is committed. If an affair has already occurred, be careful not to cover it up. It is best to confront it as it is than to deal with it after you are deeper in trouble. When you suspect marital affairs, try your best to stay calm first. Sometimes our hunches may be correct, but we may also have misinterpreted certain behavior. There are different books on dealing with marital affair. I recommend you read Janice Abraham's Spring After the Affair, Harper Paperbacks. Marital affairs are difficult to deal with. I certainly advise seeking counseling from professionals as soon as possible. Whether you are the betrayer or the betrayed, it is best to have someone who can guide and support you before you get yourself further into trouble, making it very difficult to salvage your marriage. For couples dealing with an affair, be prepared for the fact that it takes a long time to deal with the pain and heal. However, it is not irreconcilable. Wherever our situation, we must bring it to the Lord. Gordon and Balcom conceptualized a model of forgiveness for dealing with infidelity and major betrayal. The model uses constructs from multiple theories, and it includes 3 stages, each with cognitive, behavioral, and affective components. 1. Impact stage. A. Recollection of details related to the betrayal. B. A cognitive process with intense emotions. C. Dealing with the reaction to trauma. 2. Meaning stage. A. Identifying causes, why they happened. B. Make meaning, deeper understanding of the partner and the relationship. 3. Recovery or moving on stage. Giving up the negative effect that controls the injured person. B. Giving up the right to punish the partner. Apologizing or forgiving is very important to daily marriage, and we must practice it regularly. Gordon and Balcom share 3 principles. 1. Have empathy between partners regarding each other's situations. 2. Be humble. Offender admits wrong and apologizes. The hurt partner acknowledges that he or she is not free from errors and failures. 3. Forgive through overt behaviors. Couples sharing. Couples can examine how to practice forgiveness in marriage. 1. Is one spouse usually the offender and the other the victim? Is it fair and reasonable, or is it a matter of different expectations? Is there a realistic, non-distorted, balanced view of one's relationship? 2. Is it easy to apologize? Why and why not? How can you have empathy for each other, understanding why the offender behaves in a certain way and understanding how the victim feels with the offense? Why and why not? 3. How do you gain release from negative emotions after being wronged? Group sharing. Practice forgiveness in marriages. Group leader leads a discussion on the importance of apologies and forgiveness in marriage.